Hello, legends. In this video, I'm going to explain what it means to build a production-ready workflow. I've got this template that I'm going to be using to go over all the best practices that we should be following. But I just want to note that production-ready isn't just limited to what you do on the workflow. There's actually a bunch of different areas and things that it covers. So for this video, I'm going to try and just show you at a high level all those different bits and pieces. And then, we're going to go through that template and just see how that all fits into the workflow level. Because actually, some of the stuff that I'm going to show you on this template, if I just show you immediately now, you're going to think I'm crazy. You're going to think this is overkill. For example, I've got over here 3 different nodes to actually log different events throughout this workflow. So I want to explain to you what the overall big picture looks like when you're building production ready systems. And then I'm going to come back into here a little bit later in the video. So some of the things that production ready covers is reliability and resilience. So error handling, failing gracefully, not rerunning the same information twice. Also observability. So let's say, for example, you want to run 10 production-ready workflows for your business, or you want to take on 10 clients that want to run 10 production-ready workflows for their businesses. That's 100 workflows that you have to manage. Now, at that stage, you've actually got a lot of things that you have to make sure that are not failing. If they do fail, why are they failing? You want to be notifying clients if anything goes wrong. So part of production-ready is also building out these systems and a structure where you personally can also manage a lot of these workflows and actually scale your business. So if you're an agency. So observability is about like building clean databases, metrics, monitoring, alerts in case anything goes wrong, which I'll be explaining in this video because I've got a really interesting way to speak about like databases and what you can use them for. So really cool stuff coming up. Security and compliance. So like, how do you put a front door with a padlock on your workflows? A couple of weeks ago across LinkedIn, I saw a lot of like AI guys say their phone call systems were hacked where people were just dialing the number and just like running them out. And people were like racking up like really big fines, some $100s, some in the thousands of dollars. So like these like API costs or these LLM costs are real and they're tangible. So, how do you just stop like a bad person from trying to get into your workflow? Scalability and performance. Some of the stuff is about like how n8n is deployed. If you're using the cloud version, they can actually handle quite a bit of workflow. If you're doing this self-hosted as well, like how do you set up your server for that? So I'm not going to be covering that in this video, but I'm going to be linking 2 other videos, actually, one for security and one for scalability of self-hosted n8n that you can actually watch. So like it's an ecosystem of things, like once again. So that's also like production ready, maintainability, so like version control. So for example, like let's say you're running your clients like workflows on their account and they give someone on their team access to a workflow that is running 1,000 executions per day. It's running a business critical function. If someone from their team comes into the workflow and just by accident deletes it, like what do? Do you have a backup plan for that? And the likelihood of that occurring is pretty low, but also the likelihood of someone coming in and, I don't know, like finding your bank card is pretty low, but you got a PIN code on that. So it's just like these best practice things that like, none of this is reinventing the wheel, by the way. This is literally like what developers have been doing for decades. We're just trying to take what they are doing and adopt it to our experience in n8n. Then you have testing and quality assurance. So it's just like before you actually run your workflow into production, what are things that you can do to like test that the output's going to be consistent? How do you actually test all these failure routes and retries? Like how do you actually do all this stuff? So I've got another video about this, which is basically building in different environments. Once again, a different developer best practice. I'll touch on that in this video, but I'm going to link all these extra resources below. And basically my goal is now to try and build like 5 or 10 really solid n8n production ready videos for YouTube that like a beginner can watch and just like pick up all these best practices and just like double or triple their progress in a very short amount of time. Deployment and management, and then business continuity in case you like don't have backups. How do you actually maintain, mission critical like tasks that are still being completed? So as you can see, there's a lot that goes into production like ready workflows. So, I mean, all a production ready system. So at the workflow level, we want to do things that are actually feeding into all these different bits and pieces. So we're not actually just building something in isolation, we're building something that's part of a bigger system. So that's the first thing we want to learn. Now, when it comes to, for example, like these 3 nodes over here where I'm like, hey, if you see me doing this, you're going to think I'm crazy. Well, the logging that we're doing here is part of that observability. So like if you have, well, let's say you have just one workflow that you're overseeing, instead of coming into here and going through the executions and trying to just see fail, pass, and then digging in to find out why, you can actually build an external database, something in Google Sheets, Airtable, Supabase, which is just one sheet that has a bunch of columns where every time that workflow is executing, you can just list all the stuff here. So now you have a really easy, simple, structured way to just view what's happening to your workflows. And the idea here is that you just like, if anything stuffs up, that you can just look at this table and it's going to show you everything. Now, on the back of logging, you also have like, how do you gracefully handle failures? So I'm going to speak about this a little bit later. Much in the same way, we do log all the failure events, but we've got these like human in the loop. It's not human in the loop process, but we've got these like outbound messages that we're sending through Twilio, Gmail, Slack, ClickUp, creating a task, logging an event. So we're basically, we're taking care of that with this template. But the idea is that we're actually logging the key events of the workflow when we're first receiving the information, when we process the information, and then when we actually do some action with the information. So this is a very generic template, but when I explain it, it's going to make sense how everything fits together. And now if you just got one workflow that you're managing, then a simple table like this might be enough. But as soon as you have 10 workflows or 20 workflows that you want to have this really simple oversight for, well, maybe you want to do less looking at numbers and more looking at like a dashboard or something. Or even if you have, let's say, 10 clients that have 10 workflows each, how do you manage those 100 workflows? Very quickly, you begin to see that a simple database like this, a simple sheet like this, you might want to start logging different events. So let's say, just to kind of quickly come into here, we have a workflow that comes in. We get some data into the workflow. We validate if the data is what we're expecting to receive. And let's say it's not what we're expecting to receive. So we log that as like an unsuccessful validation. So if we come back to our database, what that might mean is that we put our first entry in and the validation status is failed. Well, if I just say it's failed here, I don't know why. And if I have like out of 100 executions for this workflow, if I've got 50 failures, I would just love a way to see really quickly what are those failure reasons. So what I might need to do now is kind of like push these columns out. Then I would add another column over here. So let's say this is going to be a validation reason or validation failure reason. So if I failed it, I might now put a reason here, and I might just say like the reason why the payload was failed, and that's going to be taken from n8n, whatever kind of logic we implement to here. So as you do this, you will actually start putting in extra columns here. So like a processing status failed, what's the reason? Execution status failed, what's the reason? If you also have these like if the AI step fails over here, you got this service failure. So before you know it, you got like 100 columns in your single sheet, and that's not actually effective for you to like just skim through and see what's going on. So when you're actually building out production ready databases as well, this is one way that you can do that. This is called a relational database, where you're splitting out all the main things into their own buckets. So like every time a workflow executes, you just log that a workflow executed. Every time you receive a payload, then you log what that payload was. And the beautiful thing about these kind of relational databases, which by the way are used by n8n, they're used by Facebook, they're used by Instagram, they're used by all the software and tools that you're using. Relational database is like one of the most common databases that people use. And the reason is because you can have 10 clients and you can feed all the information into this database. You don't have to duplicate this per client. Everything is has its own distinct information. So each workflow ID, if you're an n8n, the workflow itself has like a specific ID. You can't see my URL over here, but I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. So every time you actually log one of these workflow IDs, you can associate, Bart has workflow ID 1 and workflow ID 2. So you can literally have all 10 of your clients into here with all 10, 20 of their workflows. And same thing with payloads. Like all the payloads just live in here. All the data is formatted correctly. And once you have this kind of database with these 4 simple sheets, which are literally all being fed from this logging that you've embedded to your workflow, so it's not that hard to do. And as long as you consistently use a similar template structure on all your workflows, the system is consistent across all the databases, all the sheets. You can then build out really cool things like dashboards, because a dashboard is just like an aggregation of all this data. Since you have the data super cleanly organized in a really nice, accessible way, you can then build a dashboard that might show you total workflows, successful executions, failed executions. And the idea is that as you're logging all these different events, failed validation of data, failed processing, failed execution, the reason you're logging all those little bits and pieces is because now you have data for your dashboard. So if we're going back to production ready, if you were just to look at these 3 different logging steps, you would think I'm crazy. But now that you can build out really nice dashboards for yourself to just really easily see all the workflows that you're working on, which points are failing, where you can actually build custom dashboards for clients. Like if you actually filter by workflow IDs, now this dashboard becomes client A dashboard. And you can just deliver this to your client and they can see all the workflows, how it's operating. You can put really cool metrics here like money saved, hours saved by doing really interesting things in the workflow. So n8n has their own native dashboard that's built into the main homepage. But then you get people like this from the n8n community where they're aggregating their own results of their workflow executions. And then you can build out really nice graphs and have like very nice visuals and pie charts and bar charts and all the other stuff. So like if you want a really nice dashboard for your clients, even for yourself or whoever, all that starts with a solid database, which all starts with solid logging from the workflow level. So that was a bit of a deep dive into like databases. Actually, it was a very high level deep dive into databases. So if you do want to see something like, if you want me to teach you how to build databases for your workflows, comment below. And if there's enough interest, I'll definitely put the time into it. But that is one massive concept. Like if you're building automations in n8n, if you want to build apps, all this stuff needs databases. It literally is like the backbone of all these like online systems that we're interacting with. So now some other stuff that we spoke about was we had retries, errors. Okay, so security and compliance. So one of the biggest questions that people ask is, how do you do webhook security in n8n? Now, webhook security is just one layer of security that you can actually achieve. And if you want to build production-ready systems, it's important to actually secure your n8n instance across all layers. If you're cloud hosting, the server security is already taken care of by n8n. But if you're self-hosting, the security is actually up to you. So you can follow n8n's instructions for how to deploy on something like Docker, and they tell you, hey, install this bouncer for your container so that no bad internet traffic gets in. Now, the instructions are pretty clear, but they could be confusing. So in that n8n security video that I'm going to link below, I actually go over here. I help you dot your I's and cross your T's to make sure that you have this bouncer installed so that your n8n instance is never just fully exposed to the outside internet. So if someone wants to be like a bad person and get into your n8n scenario, they're going to be stopped by the bouncer. Once you have your server security set up, you can also do webhook security. So we know at the webhook level, we can install our own password to get in, so like authentication. But some stuff you can do on the actual workflow itself as well is a lot of these like big third-party providers that you're working with, like Stripe, GitHub, Twilio, Zendesk, HubSpot, all these guys are going to have their own password protection as well. So webhook level is stuff that you would implement your own password. But as like on these third-party level, these guys also have their own password. So in that video, I speak about how to like interact with their password system. And then, if the actual payload, like if the actual call is successful and meets our password, meets their password, I also speak about on the workflow level, different ways that you can validate the payload. So like another layer of security. Now, I'm going to keep things very high level here because the other video kind of covers everything in depth. But the idea is if you're not expecting a certain data to come into your workflow, there's no point processing it. There's no point wasting API costs. There's no point logging it in a database. It's all just going to be infecting like the actual ecosystem. Just put it in a bin, just like turf it, like still log it. So, hey, we're getting like out of every 100 requests, we get 10 of them are like bad data. Okay, cool. Then I go to my initiating system and I'll kind of figure it out. I'll change the configuration there. So yeah, this is a really good video for security and compliance, just making sure that no one can really get into your workflow. Now, in terms of scalability and performance, I'm going to link another video below. I basically took a self-hosted n8n instance from the smallest possible server, and then I ran n8n's benchmarking test on it to see how many workflow executions it could handle per second, which is n8n's benchmarking metric they use. I then scaled up the server, and then I tested the system across it. And then I added more workers. So like n8n, in order for you to scale and handle more requests, they have this thing we can go from main mode to queue mode. You may have heard of it. I literally ran through that entire process in that video. So you can learn how to do it and you can see how to test it. So you have this scalability aspect as well. Now, when it comes to something like version control, so this is another really interesting thing you might not know about. A lot of big companies that you work with, when they have like customer data or like customer facing tools, or just in general, a lot of their apps that they're using, they will typically have at least two different environments. So they'll have a production environment, which is live and it's customer facing. It's processing orders, it's collecting money, it's doing all the things that make the business function. But if they ever need to update their system, which is pretty common, they have a testing environment. The testing environment is literally a clone of their live environment, but it's not touching anything customer related. It might still have the same kind of data. So if you have a database, it's literally the database is also cloned, but everything is literally, there's an air gap between that test version and customers. So then the idea is that you also want to have like your own test version of your workflows. So if you ever need to make a change, you're not making a change on what's already live to the customers, because if you screw something up there, you lose something there, it's going to be very hard for you to kind of roll back and get to working order. So it's actually this thing here. So it's like having staging and production environments. So another developer best practice is the concept of using different environments. Production environment is the thing that's live. And typically each of these different environments, or at least if you have like something like testing, for example, testing and production, testing is a duplicate of production. It does not interact with the customer stuff at all. And I actually made another video about how to build in these different environments. So again, another developer best practice. And the idea is instead of building out the final product and then putting it live and kind of like stuffing things up and pissing customers off or like burning through cash, whatever like the risk is, you build out in these smaller stages where each of these environments has got a specific purpose. Like in development, this is where you literally are allowed to break things. Whereas in production, you're not allowed to break anything because that's like really bad for the business. So I'm going to link this video below as well. It just goes over this concept of like building in environments and explains how to use it, why it's important. So now's a good time to come back to this workflow and just look at the template and see all the best practices. I think it's going to be easier for us to see like how all these systems make sense because we know like what production ready means or have a better idea of what it means. So when it comes to the trigger, like we know that every time you want to start a workflow, you need some kind of triggering event. The purpose of the trigger is to not only kickstart the workflow, but it's to actually accept some data from an outside source so that we can process the data and maybe we process it and return it back to this webhook if this is meant to be like an API endpoint, this workflow, or that data helps us like make a change in a database or something. So we already spoke about webhook security. When we drill into here, we can put authentication. And because we have the other video that's very specific about server security, webhook security, workflow security, these two nodes, we already know what's going on. Like explaining those concepts makes this bit easier. So when we're validating the payload, once again, watch that video. When we're validating the payload, we're just making sure that, hey, is this what we're expecting to process? And we've seen before that we always want to have some kind of route to gracefully handle something. Like if there's a moment where in the workflow it's a yes or a no, we don't just want to continue the yeses, we also want to continue the no. And continuing the no just means that we need some way to log that it was a no. If it's a mission critical no, like, hey, if we don't actually complete this process, the whole business is going to be shut down. Okay, we need to notify someone. So we can very easily like loop someone in and say, hey, this thing just, stuffed up. And SMS is for like instant chat. The guy's going to check their phone and be able to action this straight away. Or in different scenarios where it's like less critical, we might just want to use Gmail. But the idea is that you do want to log the failure events. So you can go back to your table. You might go back to your main dashboard and you might just like click onto failed executions. You might double click on this and then you might see the table of failed executions and all the reasons so they could take that data and they could rebuild the workflow. So one thing I like to do at the end of these like validation failures or service failures, or basically at any stage where I've got a webhook, I also want to do a respond to webhook. So even if you're using this n8n workflow as an API endpoint, where all you need to do is just send a request, and then you don't need to wait for some information to come back, it's actually best practice to also let the invoking system know what's the status of this like specific call. So by default, if you just have respond immediately, the response that you get here is like workflow has started. But what you want to do is actually go to respond to webhook node. And when the API call comes in, if the data is invalidated, so it's not actually appropriate for this workflow, you still want to respond back to that invoking API call and just say like, hey, dude, sorry, I wasn't able to process this. Something went wrong. And you can actually list out over here, like you can create your own message that you're responding back. And you can say something went wrong. It was the payload was not valid. And then you might have a way on that invoking system to see that message and say, oops, like maybe I sent the wrong, like sometimes these API calls will like send an incorrect payload. So all you need to do is maybe like retry that system to actually resend you that payload. So you could have a way here that you're communicating back saying, hey, can you please resend that because the payload you sent me was not actually appropriate. And the way that you do that is, you come into here and you can send a response code. Now 200 is like a successful code, which means everything is all right. But if we come back into here, we can actually see all the response codes. So if we say immediately and we go to response code, I can just drop down and I can see request has succeeded. It has been fulfilled. No content returned, moved permanently. Okay, bad request, could not be understood, unauthorized. So if like the API key that they've given you is not accurate, so if they've used some password for your webhook and they haven't been able to get in, you can just respond back saying, hey, you're not authenticated to come into here. So this is one way that systems actually communicate with each other. It's just these respond to webhook nodes. And best practice, just leave it at the end of your workflow. It should always end with a respond to webhook if you have a webhook to use. Now, we've spoken about logging all these events in our databases, but typically we also have some kind of retrieval method for other data. So as we've spoken about extensively over here, databases are the backbone of any automation, any system, any app that you're working with. Facebook, for example, you can literally go back 10 years into your timeline and you can see every single photo that you uploaded, every video you uploaded, every photo you liked, every comment you placed on everyone else's walls and your own wall. So like everyone has a database, and typically automation is used to push data around. So my preference, where possible, is to separate like all the different parts of like separation of concerns. For processing and logic, this is all this stuff that would be like some of these AI calls. So like the generative nature of like the generativeness of actually like making a decision, generating some text, an image, a video. But all these like data transform, flow, core, all this stuff is basically this processing and logic section. I like to do, like with my AI agent calls, as much as possible, I only like to do tool calls that will bring data back into my agent. I don't really like to have an agent that has the ability to actually execute some kind of action on an outside system. That's just my own preference. You can definitely do that for yourself. But as you see here, I've actually fully isolated what information I want based on a system that I'm building. Like, I'm not trying to overcomplicate the system here. I just want to reduce the amount of the point of failures that I have. Like an extra node on my canvas is not going to increase. It's not going to add another 5 seconds onto my processing time. Like these core nodes, like action in app or logic processing or HTTP calls, all this stuff is instantaneous. Like your workflow might take a second to actually execute, even if you have like 10, 20 nodes on your canvas. So in terms of time taken, it's not actually a massive thing. And therefore, I just like to kind of keep things separate. So retrieving the data is a big important step. All of these systems that you're interacting with have databases, which we spoke about. Then you have your logic processing, always data in, but not data out in my eyes. Code processing with JavaScript, extremely important. I think this is like one of the top 5 nodes used in n8n templates. Same thing with the HTTP call. And then I'm logging what the output is here. So I always want to log, as soon as the workflow starts, I want to log that as an event. And I want to be able to see what's the payload and was it successful. That's like a nice core requirement for every single workflow that you're executing, because it's going to be receiving some kind of information. You just want to make sure at that early step, is it a thumbs up or a thumbs down? And then if it's a thumbs up, okay, cool. Was it processed in the right way? Did we pull in the right information? Did the AI agent step fail? If it failed, why did it fail? Did we run out of tokens? Did we hit our API limits? And you want to have a separate logging for this because this is a key important step. Like let's say out of 100 workflows over here, 50 of them have bad data. Okay, you need to fix the upstream. Out of 100% of workflows, 50 of these keep failing with the AI agent step. Okay, you want to be fixing this upstream. So you want to go into the next tier, you want to add some more credits. So that's why it's important to just log at separate events. For my action step, in this case, it might be like a respond to webhook node. If we're actually building some system over here, we have to now change some data in some database, like move some data across, respond to a customer, do whatever there. Maybe my action step here will just be like an API call to Zendesk to send a response or to add a tag to a ticket. It might be an API call to HubSpot to update some customer details. So action for me is just respond to webhook because that's how I started this workflow. But you can dynamically change this for what you need done. And then finally, we're just logging what that outcome was. So in this action step, if this is like a Zendesk step, we want to see what did we send to Zendesk? Like what was the actual response? What was the AI generated response? And then we want to see, did this call fail or was it successful? So we always want some kind of logging at the very last step just to make sure everything is going good. Now, when you use this template, it's not to say that you're going to be using these exact same nodes. Like in your workflow, you might not need to have this step here. So you can literally just like, you can backspace it and you can simplify your requirements. Over here, you can see that there's a log and then one step and then another log. This action step might actually be 3 or 4 nodes. So I'm not saying that you should literally just copy this like for like. I'm just giving you a high level principle of like, make sure you log all the key steps, make sure you you handle your failures gracefully. Some of this stuff, for example, over here, this is like, how do you handle failures and retries? So inside the AI agent step, if you go into your settings, a really good default to go by is just like have this retry on fail step. So n8n natively handles a lot of these retry mechanisms for you. I think every single node has this like very simple feature, which is retry on fail. And then I like to do separation of concerns as well. So instead of just stopping the workflow, you do want some way to log this event. So the default is stop workflow. Continue using the error output, which is going to give you some kind of ability to log some error message. We have this service failure. We might be emailing saying, hey, the tokens are completely out. We're logging that event in our database. And then responding back to that webhook saying, hey, sorry, we're not able to process this because you're out of tokens. All right, guys, thank you very much for watching this video. Now, I know that I covered a lot of different topics here. If you are feeling a little bit overwhelmed, there's 2 things that I recommend. The first is just take one thing. Take one thing that I've shown you here. Maybe it is like handling failures like this. Maybe it is just logging some data. Maybe it is using retries in your agent or continue on the error path. Just choose one thing that most resonated with you, that's simplest for you to do, and just try it for your workflows for the next week. And then you can come back to this video, rewatch it again. You can watch the other videos that I've linked as well. And then you can just pick up one thing at a time from there. And if you just set yourself a goal of like, just do one thing per week, for the next 10 weeks, you're going to have 10 new things that you're doing, and they're going to make you 5 times better at building these production ready systems. And that's going to be across the board, from how you manage your workflows, to your security, to your scaling, to your databases, to everything. And now my second recommendation is that I'm going to have all these resources in my school community. So I made this community specifically for the 10% of people that watch my videos that want to improve their technical skill set. So if you want to learn more about production ready n8n systems or AI coding systems or how to build really sophisticated AI callers, like these more advanced concepts that people might not be teaching on YouTube, yeah, I welcome you into the community to have more of a chat about this stuff. All right, guys, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.